The port city of Hodeidah lies about 150 kilometres west of Yemen's capital, Sana'a. It's on the Red Sea and is Yemen's most important port. Hodeidah is the entry point for 70% of Yemen's imports and vital humanitarian aid. More than 8 million people are on the brink of starvation and need this aid to survive. Hodeidah has been under the control of Iranian-backed Houthi rebels since October 2015. The exiled Yemeni government had given the rebels until midnight on Tuesday to withdraw. They didn't. So Saudi-backed coalition forces have now launched an attack on the city to regain control of the port. Humanitarian agencies have warned the offensive puts the vital aid lifeline at risk, which leaves about a quarter of the population vulnerable.
Hodeidah is absolutely central to the preserving of life, and if for any period Hodeidah were not to operate effectively, the consequences in humanitarian terms would be catastrophic.
But for more on this, let's bring in Aziz Alghashian, Middle East political expert from the University of Essex. Good to speak to you, Aziz. So we understand that Hodeidah port is very important for aid, but why is it so important for everyone else involved in this conflict?
Firstly, thank you very much for having me. It's very strategic for the world and to the end of the conflict, because I think, firstly, if the Saudi-sponsored or the Saudi-backed rebels will take control of the port, that is then hopefully the beginning of the end of the Houthi control over really their hold on Yemen, and it will then ease their hands and ease their control on Yemen itself and on the political will, which will then lead them to the negotiating table, which is the whole point of the of the conflict in the first place, the whole point of the coalition in the first place.
So from what you are saying, I'm understanding that you're saying that this offensive is actually necessary. But with this offensive, though, the Saudis are saying Yemen's humanitarian crises are secondary to strategic aims.
No, absolutely not. It's not. It's the Saudi-led coalition does not say that at all. It says that it is primary. It is the primary reason. Now, unfortunately, the reason why there is a humanitarian catastrophe there is because the Houthi rebels have obstructed humanitarian efforts going in there. And I think in your introduction, you've stated very rightly that it is a passage for, or a focal point for, humanitarian aid. Unfortunately, the Houthi rebels have taken advantage of that. Now, when the Houthi rebels are then expelled from that port, from the Hodeidah port, that will then ease and help facilitate the humanitarian efforts, I mean, that Saudi Arabia and the allies have facilitated.
Yes, but this is the main port for aid for people in rebel-held areas, and the crisis has already left 22 million people in need of aid, and 8 million people are at risk of starvation. I'm not talking about the illnesses even.
I'm sorry, I didn't get your question. What's the question?
The question is basically, Yemen is already there, 8 million people are at risk of starvation, yes. 22 million people are in need of aid, and we're talking about a port that aid comes through. So do you think this is the way towards peace?
Yes. Well, that's one way. That's just simply one way. That's not the only way, but it's a very significant way. It's a very significant... I mean, it certainly will be a victory and heading towards that right direction to help ease the humanitarian crisis there. Now, let's not forget, if you compare the humanitarian situation with Houthi-held territories, compare it with a situation or other territories that aren't under the Houthi aren't under Houthi control. The ones that are not under Houthi control are far better than the one of Hodeidah, than the one of humanitarian crisis that the Houthi rebels have. So I think it will certainly be a benefit to the humanitarian crisis. Or I'm sorry, it will help eliminate the humanitarian crisis.
Thank you very much for joining us here on TRT World, Aziz Alghashian.